Hi, my name is Sam, and welcome to this presentation on how health profession students can start or deepen a yoga practice. This knowledge should also be transferable if clients ask you questions on how to start practicing yoga. I separated the content of this presentation into 6 parts, and here is my wondrous table of contents. I won't read the table of contents out loud, but you can definitely pause the video and study the table of contents. There are 4 videos in this module. Here are the thumbnails for the YouTube videos. There are 2 short yoga sequences, one that is designed for stress relief for healthcare workers and students, and one that is clinical chair yoga that one can do with a patient. An important disclaimer is that this is to expose one to clinical chair yoga, not train them in how to use it. There is one lecture on evidence-based yoga and its clinical utility as a modality, and one on yoga as a self-care intervention for healthcare students and workers, which is the one you're watching and listening to right now. My name is Sam, and here is my information should you wish to contact me for questions, comments, feedback, yoga-based higher education curriculum development, and yoga research. I'm available for all that stuff. This presentation was made possible with support from the Oregon Healthcare Workforce Institute Area Health Education Center at Pacific University. This course is the result of a collaborative effort with the Oregon Healthcare Workforce Institute Area Health Education Center at Pacific University. I am not going to read this full list of learning objectives out loud, but you can pause the video and read them should you choose to do so. These learning objectives were created with partnership with the Oregon Healthcare Workforce Institute. A little bit about myself. I've been practicing yoga for 10 years now and teaching it officially as a certified yoga instructor for 6. I trained at yoga schools in Western Massachusetts and Northern India. I taught at an eating disorders clinic, detox centers, inpatient psychiatric units, and did private sessions. I have a strong passion for medical yoga, which drew me to occupational therapy. I feel as though I've been targeting my passion for yoga by practicing, teaching, and now researching it, hitting my passion from different angles. This is a pretty funny cartoon from the New Yorker where one feels like they are being burned at the stake and everything is falling down around them, and someone is telling them, "Have you considered taking up yoga?" I understand that this would feel pretty invalidating. That is not what I want this module to feel like at all. I certainly do not want this module to seem like busy work or like I am a broken record saying, you must do yoga. I know not everyone will become a yogi from this module. What I want, though, is for all of you to have a basic understanding of what yoga is, whether to use it for your own self-care or to recommend it to clients and colleagues who could benefit from it. A personal communication with the grant writer who found me for this content included that professionals are sick of emails suggesting that they do yoga and meditation from management rather than management making structural changes to reduce the immense stressors of working in healthcare. The upstream downstream metaphor in the discussion of healthcare worker burnout is helpful to conceptualize that we can intervene with systemic factors that are upstream with management or with individuals that are affected by said decisions downstream with healthcare workers. It is important to distinguish that healthcare worker burnout is a macro level problem that is often placed on individuals experiencing it to somehow find a solution. There's a call for more upstream burnout solutions, meaning that managers and leaders need to make system wide changes to prevent individuals from burning out. Historically, burnout was focused on the individual micro level, meaning someone needed to do more self-care for themselves, such as yoga. Leaders need to ask workers what they need. Workers need to be listened to, and leaders need to use what workers say to them is burning them out to make changes. Yoga can help treat a plethora of burnout related issues on an individual level, but it is not going to solve healthcare management failures and the completely broken system that is US healthcare today. It is important to note that as students, these upstream macro level systemic factors are not really in your control, and yoga can be especially effective for individual level burnout. Yoga can treat burnout symptoms, but more importantly, healthcare systems need to support our workers better. Ways to do this include allowing for longer and more frequent breaks during shift work and flexible shift scheduling, such as the 4-day work week. Yoga can be an efficacious adjunct treatment for burnout symptoms, but healthcare systems need to make changes to prevent burnout from the first place. Leaders need to ask staff what they need most and make it happen. Yoga is time intensive, and some would even argue it is time invasive, since it has a clear dose response relationship in the literature. Misconceptions exist about who can and cannot do yoga. Yoga is actually for everybody and can be adapted to everyone's body. Even people who are fully paralyzed can participate in yoga as it is much more than just movements. Section 2, Healthcare Worker Burnout and Yoga. In a very interesting study on yoga and music as an intervention for frontline healthcare workers during the COVID-19 pandemic, Vajpayee et al. 2021 conducted a pre-test post-test study in a group of 209 healthcare workers who were given 30 minutes of yoga and music a day on WhatsApp video chat. They separated the participants into groups that showed abnormal levels on the depression, anxiety, and stress scale, the DAS-42, and participants who showed within normal range of these measures per assessment criteria. In both groups, there was an intervention group and a control group who did not receive the intervention. On a paired t-test using the depression, anxiety, and stress scale as an outcome pre-test, post-test measure, there were statistically significant improvements most in depression levels, then stress levels, and lastly, anxiety levels. Also, there was a greatest average reduction in symptoms with the participants who scored in the abnormal range in the scale at the pretest. One does have to note some inherent limitations, such as response bias, i.e., participants wanting to please the researcher, showing favorable, better outcomes in the post-test than the pretest, that are inherent in these questionnaire-based studies. In a pre-test post-test study where 18 frontline healthcare workers during the COVID-19 pandemic were given 1 hour a week of yoga for 3 months, participants were given a battery of questionnaires to complete and a biometric test of salivary cortisol levels. 1 hour of yoga a week for 3 months is actually a pretty low dose of yoga, so it is not surprising that the outcomes of the study were moderate. Participants did not have a change in salivary cortisol, the PHQ-9 test, which measures depression, or the self-compassion scale. Participants did show improvements in the Jefferson Scale of Empathy and the Sense of Coherence Scale and the Connor-Davidson Resilience Scale, but these improvements were not statistically significant. There were, however, 2 outcomes that did show statistically significant changes in this study. Common humanity increased and over-identification decreased. It is very interesting to me that the two measures of the study that had statistically significant favorable outcomes were common humanity and over-identification. Common humanity is a section of the standardized questionnaire-based assessment often used in yoga and mindfulness research called the self-compassion scale. Common humanity is associated with the acceptance that making mistakes is part of being a person, i.e., to err is human, and that these errors unite us rather than divide us. Yoga's synchronous nature can help with human to human group bonding and seeing ourselves as part of a greater community. Over identification, per this assessment, means that when one is suffering and are aware of said suffering, they magnify said suffering and start to think that nothing else in their lives or in the world is important. In short, they over identify with the negative feelings and zero in on them. In a study on yogic breathing instruction and the mental health of frontline COVID-19 healthcare workers, researchers Divya et al. 2021 conducted an intervention study consisting of a 4-day online yoga, breath, and meditation workshop, totaling 8 hours of total yoga instruction, with a recommendation to practice the techniques 35 minutes a day. They found statistically significant improvements in sleep quality with a moderate effect size in sleep quality. They also found a statistically significant reduction in anxiety and depression measures, also with a moderate effect size, and in resilience and satisfaction with life measures. It is important to note response bias in order to please researcher is a huge limitation in any study that relies on pre-test, post-test questionnaires. The information in this slide is my personal opinion based on 12 years of experience working within the US healthcare system. I actually hold a master's in healthcare administration that I received through a liberal arts college. The overarching theme in every class was that the US healthcare system is broken and convoluted. Medical bankruptcy is blatant. Many are uninsured. And even with decent insurance, healthcare costs an arm and a leg. I definitely am aware through personal experience in the field that the majority of the powers that be within healthcare value money over people in a way that can be absolutely sickening. One definition of burnout, according to Kokiara et al. 2019, on page 285, is prolonged exposure to physical, psychological stress that results in deterioration of the emotional functioning of the individual and in a difficulty of adaptation to their professional commitments. Ergo, burnout affects both the individual and the patients they serve. The World Health Organization does recognize burnout as a global health issue and occupational phenomenon, but does not classify it at this point as a medical condition. Burnout has serious implications both upstream at the management level because institutions lose a lot of money training new staff with frequent turnover, and at the individual level, as dedicated employees may leave jobs or even the profession to preserve their mental and physical health. A recent healthcare administration failure since the pandemic started was thousands of New York nurses went on strike due to work conditions that affected the safety of both the nurses and the patients. The maximum of high acuity patients per registered nurse should be about 4, but several hospitals were mandating that a single nurse take care of 12 patients, which is unsafe as many are in a vulnerable physical and mental state and could sustain a serious fall at any time. At least 7,000 registered nurses went on strike out of 75,000 RNs in the city, per CNN. Due to mental health difficulties I have experienced in the past, prior to starting an inpatient psychiatric clinical rotation, I turned to my friend Daisy, who is a high-powered social worker in Manhattan, for advice on how to handle the environment. Daisy said that I needed to rely really heavily focus on self-care when not on the unit to get through the rotation. So I did tons of fun hobbies when not at work so that when I was working with the suffering patients, I could be an empathetic light helping them through a dark tunnel. When we work in healthcare, we are surrounded by people going through trauma, and it can be difficult to not absorb all the pain and suffering we see on a daily basis. I observed a pattern that would change my life forever prior to grad school. I realized that if I went to yoga after working in healthcare all day, I would have a great night. However, if I went straight home without going to yoga, I would often experience sadness and anxiety, having a difficult night. For me, yoga has been amazing for burnout prevention. I want to share what I know and have researched for you guys to have a tool to support your own wellness and healthcare practice. Doing it consistently has worked well for burnout prevention for me in my life. For me, yoga stood out compared to other burnout prevention strategies because it is like exercise, a therapy session, and meditation all in one. I came to the class with all my problems and stressors, and as I focused in the front of my mind on going through the motions of yoga and following the instructions, I felt like my brain would problem solve and process emotions in the back of my mind. I remember getting a lot of epiphanies about why I chose to be a healer and work in healthcare and process certain traumas in my past, making logical and emotional connections as to why things were the way they are. There are other burnout strategies too, but yoga does work for a lot of people. When it comes to self-care and burnout, I found that hobbies are so important, and yoga can help with any physical hobby when it comes to warm-ups, stretches, and the nuances of effective postural alignment. Yoga has helped me pick up so many hobbies quickly and helps me do them safely since my balance, flexibility, and most importantly, muscular alignment has improved so much from yoga. Most of us go into healthcare because we want to help people who really need the help. Everyone gets sick and or injured at some point in their lives and are in need of help. Taking care of sick people is hard on the body and hard on the mind. We often find ourselves lifting heavy patients and doing body movements that can lead to degenerative chronic overuse injuries. It is important to note that taking care of patients is inherently stressful and can be hard on both mind and body. When discussing burnout within the field of healthcare, I believe it is important to note that suicide risk is much higher for individuals in the helping professions, 40% higher for men and 130% higher for women. Researchers Di Mario et al. 2023 found that healthcare workers face considerably higher rates of depression, anxiety, burnout, insomnia, and stress disorders than the average population. This does not just hurt the healthcare workers, but it hurts the patients whom they serve. It is hard to give good care with empathy when you don't feel good in your body or at peace in your mind. Because working in healthcare is hard on the body and hard on the mind, we are in need of treatments that help both mental health and physical health for healthcare workers. The cool thing is that yoga is good for both physical and mental health and can target both types of symptoms. Long hours of work enduring abuse from patients and from management can lead to professional exhaustion, emotional depletion, stress, depression, anxiety, and depersonalization as mental health symptoms. From lifting and moving patients and repetitive motions in incorrect stationary posture leads to increased risk of chronic degenerative and musculoskeletal diseases from repetitive motions in said incorrect and stationary posture. Yoga has a strong evidence base for being efficacious against both mental and physical health conditions. Yoga's meditative and spiritual nature can target mental health symptoms such as depersonalization, emotional depletion, professional exhaustion, stress, depression, depression and anxiety. Yoga's physical nature can help ameliorate increased risk of chronic degenerative musculoskeletal diseases from repetitive motions in the incorrect stationary posture. Yoga is a physical practice aimed at improving one's posture and body mechanics through repeated warm ups and postures that can realign one's musculoskeletal system and teach proper body mechanics that can be transferred to both athletic and work endeavors. People enter the healthcare field for a plethora of reasons. One of them would ideally be to help others. Burnout is not just a problem for healthcare staff, but for sick and injured clients and patients that are coming to us to receive care. Will a burnt out staff really go the extra mile for a client or patient? Is a negative, grouchy nurse or doctor going to make a patient leave the hospital a positive review? We have robust research actually that healthcare worker burnout can lead to healthcare associated infections, patient falls, medication errors, and other patient adverse events. In an 11 study pre pandemic systematic review on yoga's effect on healthcare worker mental health, researchers Kokiara et al. 2019 found that healthcare workers generally have a positive view on yoga and many use it as a self care intervention. In the intervention studies, they found that yoga reduced measures of stress and symptoms of burnout and increased self compassion and measures of quality of life in healthcare workers. In a 2021 systematic review of the literature, researchers Cesar Anderson et al. 2021 found that across 25 yoga studies for healthcare workers and students, the two most frequently reported benefits were stress and anxiety reduction. Additionally, they were able to cope more in acutely stressful situations. Other prominent benefits across studies included less musculoskeletal aches and pains, especially back pain, and improvements in self compassion and self care practices. In a randomized controlled trial, 120 nurses were recruited. The intervention group was given at least 50 or more minutes of yoga at least twice a week after their nursing shifts. The intervention group had statistically significant improvements in lower work stress on the questionnaire on medical workers' stress and better sleep quality on the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. In another study, the 20 nurses in the intervention group were given 8 weeks of yoga. They had statistically significant improvements in measures of self care, mindfulness, and reported decreased emotional exhaustion and depersonalization. Depersonalization is where one is going through so much stress, they start to feel like they are out of their bodies and split from their bodies. This is a protective detachment phenomenon certain people going through trauma experience. In a pre-test post-test study on the role of yoga and meditation in buffering burnout in medical students, Researchers Bond et al. 2013 found that a yoga and meditation elective course with neuroscience content increased students' self-regulation and self-compassion levels and abilities. This makes sense as yoga is more about one's inner world than one's outer world, and that the effects would be internal about our relationship with ourselves rather than external. The med students had improvements in empathy measured by the Jefferson Scale of Physician Empathy and perceived stress measured by Cohen's Perceived Stress Scale, but these improvements were not statistically significant. This study was a mixed method studies, and qualitative findings included participants feeling increased connections between their minds and bodies, finding a community within an environment that fosters so much competing, more mindfulness, better stress management skills, and confidence in the use of mind-body skills with patients. In a single-arm clinical pre-test post-test trial on healthcare workers in Rome, Italy, researchers La Torre et al. 2015 found that yoga and mindfulness-based stress reduction training together in a 4-week course consisting of 16 hours of total instruction had some really interesting statistically significant outcomes. Quality of life improved and negative affect decreased on the short form 12 and positive negative affect scale, respectively. What's fascinating is that on the STAI, State Trait Anxiety Inventory, anxiety reduced significantly and immediately in state anxiety, anxiety about events to come, and in trait anxiety, anxiety as a personal characteristic. The overarching conclusion is that yoga can assist with reduction in work-related stress. It is important to note that yoga has a dose-response relationship, meaning to continuously enjoy the health benefits, one has to practice regularly. Introduction to Yoga Philosophy. Yoga can be dogmatic, meaning there's an agreed upon religious spiritual component. There was a good amount of dogma in both of my yoga teacher trainings. The best advice I've ever received when it comes to content that is dogmatic is take what feels right for you and your soul and leave the rest. It is impossible to discuss the philosophy and practice of yoga without including a little bit of dogma. I want to share with you a spiritual practice that has transformed my life and let you make your own opinion about it. In Sanskrit, an ancient Indian language, yoga means to yoke or to unite, union with body, mind, and soul, and union with a group of people. Historians believe that the Indus-Sarasvati civilization in north-central India began practicing yoga as they were seeking enlightenment. Scholars disagree as to when exactly humans first started practicing yoga, but they have settled between 8700 BC to 3700 BC, which is quite a large range. Yoga is thought to have originated close to the Ganges River in Rishikesh, Uttarakhand, India, where I put in a photo of me diving into the river. Yoga is mentioned in the Vedas, the oldest scriptures in Hinduism, and the Upanishads, which is a text on Hindu philosophy. Between 100 to 200 AD, Patanjali wrote the Yoga Sutras. Patanjali converted a heterogeneous and often contradicting set of beliefs and practices into an 8-part yogic system as sort of a handbook for enlightenment or a formula for healing and preventing pain. I interviewed a yoga instructor in India who has 30 plus years of experience in yoga instruction. When I asked them about advice for new students, they said that first and foremost, new students need to learn that yoga is an eightfold practice. This is vital for understanding and reaping the full benefits of the practice. I personally see and believe that these 8 practices are an ancient formula for healing that have worked for me. Most people, when they think about yoga, they focus on asana, movement, and postures, which is actually just 1/8 of the total practice. Yoga asana was actually developed in order to relax and strengthen the body for prolonged periods of sitting meditation. The yamas and niyamas are yoga's ethical code. The point of starting with them is essentially be a good person before you get into deeper meditative states. Asana is movement and postural yoga. Pranayama is yogic breathing exercises and breath awareness, which is often the link between movement and meditation. Pratyahara means withdrawal of the senses or introversion. There is a high amount of overlap between pratyahara and interoception, which is feeling and sensing what is going on within the body. Then meditation can begin. The yogic path to meditation is choosing an object of concentration. I had a yoga instructor explain that she meditated on the moon often because the moon was feminine and bright and beautiful, which were all qualities she wanted to emulate. So she would focus on the moon, dharana, and then feel connected to the moon, dhyana, and sometimes would feel like she had become one with the moon, samadhi. This focus on meditation can be the moon, a mountain, a lake, a tree, or something internal, like courage, bravery, peace, strength, and love. My intention is to explain that there's an ethical component to being a yogi. Many people who have devoted their lives to yoga are worried that people will only view it as a physical practice for fitness benefits, despite it being so much more than that. Doing a difficult posture on Instagram does not a yogi make. Following the 8 limbs is what makes one a yogi. Many compare the yamas and niyamas with the Ten Commandments, but it is different in that morality is relative in the yoga tradition. We as yogis all have to practice these tenets, but we each have different relationships with these tenets that may differ day by day. To many, this may be considered dogmatic, but many of us yogis feel that to really practice yoga, you need to follow these ethical principles, but in your own way. Satya means truth, and so yogis must all observe truth, but truth might be different day by day. To make these potentially esoteric ethical principles more relevant to you guys, I decided to include an example of how these ethical tenets could apply to behavior in the healthcare workplace. Ahimsa means nonviolence and moving away from violence. This is seen in the Hippocratic Oath and in research ethics. Satya means truth, which is important as everything we document is a binding legal document and hence must be truthful. I personally believe that a hard truth is better than a kind lie, especially when interacting with patients. Asteya means do not steal. When we steal, we make the assumption that the universe will not provide for us and unintentionally attract scarcity. Brahmacharya means control over impulses, which translates well to the importance of boundaries with colleagues and clients in the healthcare workforce. Aparigraha means healthy non-attachment, which is good when it comes to not taking work home with you or home into work with you. The niyamas are observances. Saucha means cleanliness, which works well with healthcare to prevent hospital-acquired infections. You better wash your hands. Santosha means gratitude, which I think is important because having an altruistic career where we are helping others is a privilege. Tapas is heat and discipline, which makes sense since graduate school and patient care are difficult and require self-discipline. Svadhyaya means help self-study, and we are all required to take continuing education credits. Ishvara Pranidhana means trusting life, which is so important due to the high liability and high stress in this field. Is yoga a religion? For me and my beliefs, yoga is a secular practice. Some people do consider it an expression of Hinduism and a religious practice. About 2,000 years ago, Patanjali considered God to be the highest version of oneself. Spiritual dogma does exist in the yoga world, especially on retreats. There are lots of examples where yoga pays homage to these religions, or these religions pay homage to yoga. For example, many Hindus believe that Lord Shiva decided to come down to teach yoga to humans. Some versions of Lord Shiva have 8 limbs, and yoga has 8 limbs. In yoga practice, when it ends, people traditionally go from corpse pose, shavasana, to a fetal position to symbolize rebirth from practice, giving homage to the 3 religions which all believe in reincarnation. The tenet of Jainism is do no harm, which is also one of the yamas in yoga, ahimsa. Sitting meditation is a hallmark of a Buddhist practice, which is actually the entire goal of yoga, is to feel healthy enough in your mind and body to perform sitting meditation for extended periods of time. Buddhists and Hindus chant Om as well. Part 4, Starting a Yoga Practice. According to the expert I interviewed, yoga should be pleasurable starting out, meaning that if something does not feel right in one's body, they shouldn't do it. Instead, they should ask for a modification, use props, or refrain from certain movements or breath practices. The main difference between yoga and other exercise is that yoga focuses on the inner world. Running, swimming, diving is about the body's interactions with the outer world. I try to say in most of my classes that yoga is more about how things feel on the inside than how they look on the outside. There are many different kinds of yoga, in case you didn't already know. Just to illustrate that different lineages call postures different things, I wanted to show you that tree pose and vinyasa yoga versus Ashtanga yoga look pretty different. When selecting a community instructor for a client, some things to pay attention to are the style of yoga that they teach, the amount of time they have been teaching yoga. More experience is usually correlated to better instruction, as common sense may tell you. Another variable is the amount of training, 200 hours versus 500 hours. 200 hours is the initial yoga teaching certification. 500 hours is the more advanced yoga teaching certification. With style of yoga, try to consider the client with their needs and which form of yoga they may benefit most from. Are they an athlete looking to enhance performance, a cardiac patient, someone who is elderly, someone who is injured or looking for injury prevention, or someone suffering from isolation? What yoga studios call their classes? Gentle Kripalu and Iyengar Yoga are more focused on slower classes with gentler poses. In yoga studios, they usually call this Hatha Yoga or Gentle Yoga. Technically, all of it is Hatha Yoga, but in yoga studios, a Hatha class generally means a gentle class. Bikram is done in 105-degree rooms. Bikram yoga is often called Hot 90 since it takes 90 minutes to do the sequence, or Hot 26 because it is 26 postures. The reason many studios do not call it Bikram anymore is because the man who popularized the sequence who did not invent any of the poses, and many believe plagiarized the sequence from his guru. Types of Hatha postural yoga. Vinyasa is very popular and usually includes sun salutations, which is one breath, one movement with fast transitions between poses broken up with a push up to back bend to downward dog motion called a vinyasa. Ashtanga yoga is more vigorous than a vinyasa class and is a set sequence. Power yoga includes much more strengthening exercises and the most difficult yoga postures. Most yoga classes are a creative expression from the teacher's lesson plan. Bikram and Ashtanga are not. It is the same set of postures in the same order every time. There is a creative component of how the teacher teaches the posture, but the sequence is very repetitive. Vinyasa, Ashtanga, and Power Yoga are the best cardiovascular workouts in yoga, since they include more Surya Namaskar, sun salutations movements. There's a statue of the sun salutation sequence in the New Delhi, India airport. Sun salutations are a common warm-up in yoga and most frequently seen in Vinyasa, Ashtanga, and Power Yoga. Gentler versions of the sun salutation are found in the gentler lineages. Also, I have seen it be adapted to chair yoga as well. There are two more styles of yoga that are harder to compare to the lineages already mentioned. These are Kundalini Yoga and Yoga Nidra. Yoga Nidra is guided meditation that is somatic in nature and brings one into their own body. This style uses poetry and repetition to help students reach deep meditative states. Kundalini is an amazing practice that is very mystical and more meditative. Movements are repetitive, and the goal is to attain a blissful state of euphoria. In Kundalini Yoga, the tradition is that there's a dormant snake in your root chakra that climbs up to your crown chakra when awoken for deep healing. One can actually do yoga without any materials. It is nice, however, to have a yoga mat as this will provide some cushion between the joints and the floor. Also, it can be ceremonious to roll out one's yoga mat. I suggest if you practice yoga at home to roll up the yoga mat in between practices or it will get super dirty. It is helpful to have props which could include blocks, a yoga strap, a yoga blanket, and to complete the practice on a flat surface with room to stretch out. Props help us modify the postures and stabilize ourselves within postures. They are not just for beginners. Any blanket or towel could substitute for a yoga blanket if you don't have one. Neckties, belts, resistance bands, or a towel could easily substitute for a strap. Books can substitute for yoga blocks. A bolster is very helpful with restorative yoga, and a rolled up blanket can substitute for one. Many people have a space in their home dedicated to yoga and/or meditation. A mat is also symbolic as a space and time designated to practice yoga. Yoga is traditionally done with bare feet. People do it in socks, but practicing with bare feet is a good way to strengthen the muscles in one's feet and to ground oneself into the floor or earth. Loose-fitting or form-fitting clothing are needed since jeans and business clothes could restrict movement. There are designated spaces where people can do yoga naked if they choose. What do I do? Either start with a YouTube video or attend a yoga class and follow along to the teacher's instruction, but only do what feels good and natural in your body. See what shapes and movements the instructor is demonstrating and what others in the class are doing and follow along if it feels right in your body. It is totally okay to ask the teacher for a modification if a posture is uncomfortable. Remember, yoga should be pleasurable. Eventually, as you learn more, you can do yoga on your own without instruction, but may still prefer to go to a class and listen to a teacher. One quote that I just love when it comes to yoga is you do yoga and then yoga does you. Your body will tell you the poses and movements it craves once you have more experience with your yoga practice. Alert the instructor if you have an injury or condition. If you don't like a yoga class, don't give up. Quality of instruction is highly variable and is even a listed confounder in yoga research studies. Some things to look out for when finding a quality yoga instructor is ability to modify poses, tone of voice, and simply whether or not you felt better after their yoga class. When does one practice? Yoga classes are offered at yoga studios, gyms, workplaces as a benefit, at events in the park, and on campus. Yoga classes can be found for free on YouTube. There's a list of resources available in this module stratified at the local, regional, state, and national levels. Traditionally, yoga is done the first thing in the morning, the time when the ego is smallest and the body is most tight, so sensation is increased. Some yogis dedicated a specific amount of time each day for yoga, from 5 minutes to an hour. Find what works for you. Where does one practice? Some yogis make time to go to yoga studios and to take classes, which is my favorite way to practice. Some do it outside, others prefer it inside. Some yogis integrate yoga postures and breathing into other activities. My yoga life hack to keep it affordable is to yoga studio hop, taking advantage of introductory offers. Often, studios do a special of $30 for 30 days of yoga and other awesome discounts. A yoga studio hop big time. Also, when you spend money on something, it makes you not want to waste it, and it encourages you to show up and make time for this service. You can find discounts on yoga studio web pages, ask about discounts at your first yoga class in a studio, or find discounts on the MindBody app, a popular yoga scheduling app. I screenshotted a deal here in Portland, $30 for 30 days. At-home practice for beginners advice. Adrienne is not just a YouTube yoga lady. She is the YouTube yoga lady. YouTube is an amazing resource to learn movement modalities that is pandemic and budget friendly. This is also a really good resource if you want something specific, like yoga for lower back pain or yoga for carpal tunnel syndrome, rather than attending a yoga class that is meant for the general population and general wellness. Going to a yoga studio for the first time. Attend a gentle yoga or restorative yoga or hatha yoga class at a yoga studio and let the instructor know it's your first class. If you have a fitness background, vinyasa class or hot yoga class should be fine, but don't do anything that doesn't feel good in your body. But what if I'm not flexible? A question I get a lot is, what if I'm not flexible enough to do yoga? In reality, those who are the least flexible are the people who need yoga the most to work on their range of motion and help with muscular tightness. Misconceptions exist about who can and cannot do yoga. Yoga is actually for everybody and can be adapted to everybody. Deepening one's yoga practice, Section 5. When I asked my expert opinion source about advice they have for people who already practice yoga but would like to deepen their practice, they said that yoga is not a lecture, it is a practice. First, the yogi should continue to focus on asana, which is movement, and holding poses, and then layer in the breathing exercises. Yoga is their time to focus on the inner world, which will help them when they interact with the outer world in life, social relationships, and in more vigorous exercise. Yoga will increase their knowledge of what their bodies need and what their bodies can do. In India, this is how I was taught to sequence my at-home practice, which is what I try to do when I'm doing yoga with no instruction. I start with loosening range of motion exercises and try to target the major joints. Then I do sun salutations, standing yoga poses on the ground, and then shavasana. I choose a set amount of time to practice, time to spend to each part of my practice and set a timer. If I have a full 75 minutes, I do 15 minutes of each section. Normally, I don't. So I do 5 to 10 minutes in each section and prioritize my upper back posture, wrists, and hamstrings, as those are my tightest areas. My music suggestions for yoga are Trevor Hall and Nako/Medicine for the People. Research for Section 6, research for yoga used with health professionals and students. In a randomized controlled trial, pre-test, post-test study with a control group, Monson et al. 2017 did a study on the use of yoga to treat musculoskeletal pain in dental hygiene students. 38 dental hygiene students were in the yoga group, and 39 students were in the control group. Dental hygiene can be very hard on one's body due to neck bending, repetitive motion, and bending hunched over clients all day. The statistically significant decrease in musculoskeletal pain may mean that yoga can help dental hygienists achieve longevity in the profession and at least be an adjunct therapy to present dental hygiene students. In this 2020 randomized controlled trial, Guerra et al. 2020 found that just 30 minutes of yoga-based meditation a week for 2 months significantly increased healthcare professionals' measures quality of sleep. In this semi-experimental, non-randomized study with a control group, Erdogan and Mutz 2020 found that 1 hour of yoga a week for a month decreased stress and anxiety levels in youth aged 18 to 25. They also reported better social lives and interpersonal connections with friends, family, and romantic partners. In most yoga postures, one needs to open their heart, bringing their sternum to the sky in a primal sense of victory. It's a dramatic way to say that yoga is all about increasing one's posture. This physical opening of the chest, the opposite of slumping over, I believe opens the heart emotionally as well. To the right is a mural I photographed in India. And to the left is a powerful backbending posture, camel or Uttanasana. It's no wonder to me that yoga helps people with their social lives. One quote I love from this documentary on yoga is, "If you do yoga, you'll feel better. And if you feel better, then you'll behave better." One common myth is that yoga is good for weight loss. Circling back to the dental hygiene study, the dental hygiene students didn't actually lose any weight according to the study results. The fact that yoga did not change the BMI of the dental hygiene students was consistent with many scientific findings that yoga is not actually excellent for weight loss because of aerobic activity. However, yoga does reduce cravings for junk food and alcohol, which then helps yogis maintain ideal weight. The chakras, or subtle bodies. The chakras are also a formula for healing. They are often referred to as the subtle bodies. Spiritually, they are spinning disks of light and important energy centers. Practically, they're useful posture points to describe yoga poses and enhance interoception. The chakras made an appearance in the Marvel film Doctor Strange, as seen by this screenshot. I am going over these from the bottom to the top, and here's why. You're supposed to focus on the basic needs, which is in your root chakra, and then go up to your beliefs, which is the highest chakra. The first chakra is your root at the base of your spine, and its purpose is survival. The sacral chakra is below the umbilicus, and its purpose is both creativity and sexuality. The solar plexus has to do with strength and being assertive. The heart is about love and connection and bridges us to others and bridges the lower and higher chakras. The throat is about truth and listening. The third eye is about one's intuition, and the crown is above the body and about someone's belief systems that govern their life. The chakras are a useful postular alignment tool. Wheel pose in Sanskrit is called chakrasana because it ignites all 7 chakras. It is a good example of using the chakras to help someone with their alignment. The solar plexus chakra goes to the ceiling, while the heart chakra goes to the wall behind oneself. Thank you guys so much for listening to my presentation. I believe yoga could help you, your clients, or your colleagues, and hope this information was useful in increasing your understanding of what yoga is all about and how to start a practice. Yoga is an efficacious wellness modality. I hope you enjoyed learning about some of the nuances of what it means to practice yoga. Here are my references for my images used. Here are the scholarly articles that were used, part 1 and part 2. Here is my contact information for a second time. You are welcome to contact me for questions, comments, feedback, yoga-based higher education curriculum development, and yoga research opportunities. And last but not least, I want to give a huge thank you for the Oregon Healthcare Workforce Institute Area Health Education Center at Pacific University for believing in me to create content for their program. Thank you guys very much, and namaste.